You're listening to The Money Hour with your host, Tina Mitchell. Sponsored by Absolute Mortgage, a division of Pinnacle Capital Mortgage Corporation. Now, in the studio, local mortgage and finance expert, Tina Mitchell.
Well, welcome back to the Money Hour with your host and mortgage expert, Tina Mitchell, right here at 1150 AM KKNW, the Saturday, March 12th show. I'm committed to providing you knowledge needed to be successful in every arena, every area regarding your finances. Knowledge is power, and that's what the show is all about and what you'll receive from listening to this entire hour. If you're listening to a show at a different time or day, you are listening to a rebroadcast, but I am here to connect with you, and I'm more importantly here to connect you with the amazing guests that I have in studio. So please feel free to call the show 1-855-400-1150. That's 1-855-400-1150 or online at themoneyhour.com. Again, for any questions that you have for my guest. And right now in studio, I have Dennis Brooke. Dennis, thank you so much. First time having a conversation with you. Really excited about our topic discussion today. So I appreciate you coming in and visiting.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
And a little bit about Dennis. Dennis Brooke managed to retire early from corporate life to write and travel full-time. He is a former Air Force officer and IT consultant. In April, he and his wife will be setting off on a 3 to 5 year stint of living around the world. My gosh. That would be awesome. In addition to travel, Dennis's passion is writing. His newly released novel, The Last Apostle, sold out in the first printing 2 weeks before release date. The former president of Northwest Christian Writers Association and has bylines in over 24 international and local publications. So what we're going to talk about here today, and I'm excited because it's a different twist than some things that we talk about on the show, which is always nice. But is early retirement right for you? We're going to talk about their couple, Dennis and his wife, one couple's formula to rove the world at 55. So Dennis, what was the first step to financial independence for you?
I think probably the best, I can give a great quote that kind of sums up our philosophy. And I heard J.C. Watts, who used to be an Oklahoma congressman, and he talked about when he was growing up, his dad used to tell him, you know, J.C., if your outgo is more than your ingo, your downgo is going to be more than your upgo, which is really a fancy way of saying if you spend more than you bring in, you're on a downward financial spiral. And the way that my wife and I really made that work is when we first got out of the Air Force, I was moved to New Jersey, where I worked for an insurance company for a number of years. And our first 3 months there, we wrote down every single penny that we spent. You know, where was the money going? Yep. Where was it coming? And so it was really good for us because we could see where the money was going. Like we found that we were spending a lot of money dining out. You know,
yeah,
so it was a good way
to do.
Yeah, easy to do. And you know, it's not just the big numbers like your mortgage and all the things like that. It's little things like that that add up. And so we saw that, made some changes, and so we were able to start saving better.
When I talk to buyers about budgeting, I always tell them, write down everything you buy, because if you're forced to write it down before you buy it, you're going to rethink actually purchasing that item.
Right.
And always be saving for something. It doesn't matter what you're saving for. If you're saving for something, you're going to think twice before purchasing something you don't need. And you said it's the small dollars, the small items that really rack it up. Now, what about debt? Did you ever have struggle with debt? Is that kind of shift you into this mode, or was it just natural to be financially smart with your money?
Well, part of it was we made a decision we wanted to retire early and kind of be free of the weekly paycheck. But when I got out of the college, out of the University of Washington, went on active duty, I was making what I thought was a huge second lieutenant salary. And so we racked up debt on cars, on furniture, things like that, you know, eating out. And so, yeah, we definitely struggled with it. And it really wasn't until our 30s where we made some big changes. Well,
that's really exciting because 30 to 50, that's 20 years, which means that maybe people are thinking you started really, really young, but you actually started in your third. That's young. I mean, I'm much older. I'm close to 50 now.
Right.
But that's awesome. Now, you said you worked in the insurance industry doing product development. Any advice that you have for my listeners on the experience that you gathered while there?
Right, definitely. So one thing that we learned is you only buy insurance for stuff that you can't afford to lose. Like, for example, buy insurance on a house, buy insurance on your car, liability, term life. But there's a lot of little things that people try to sell you insurance on. And the best example is product warranties. Okay. And if you buy product warranty insurance, you're paying for the administrative costs of that company, you're paying for profit, you're paying for a commission, and then a chunk of that is the insurance amount. how much it costs them to replace things. And so what I do is if you go in and those are the type of things you can usually pay for insurance on your own. If the TV breaks, replace another.
Yeah. And
the smart way to do that is they go in and they say, okay, it's going to be $50 for this insurance. So go ahead. That's very interesting. Take that $50, put it in a bank account. And you do that 4 or 5 times with purchases like that. That money is working for you instead of for that company. So only buy insurance for the stuff that you can't afford to lose.
And I always talk about getting your money working for you. Same thing with making sure you kind of break even with your deductions with mortgage, because you don't want the government collecting interest on that, but instead to collect it yourself. So let's talk about your inspiration, because I imagine in your journey of financial independence, there had to be an inspiration behind that.
Yeah, and there were a number of those, other than the fact that we rang up debt and said, this is not a way to live. But
yes.
I remember I was an Air Force officer living in Germany, and I'm a captain, and I'm talking to a friend of mine who's a first lieutenant, and he's telling me that he was living on a staff sergeant salary. He was in the Air Force, got all the way up to staff sergeant, and then went to college and got his commission. And he's the first lieutenant telling me, I'm living on a staff sergeant salary, me, my wife, and my kids. And he was banking the rest of that money. He was, investing, making that money work for him. And I wish I had listened to him 10 years before, because we might have this conversation a few years back. Yeah. So
he was a big inspiration for you to see what he was able to accomplish.
Right. And it was great. And a couple of things that we've done is my wife and I also read a lot. And some of our favorite books on this subject are The Millionaire Next Door by Thomas Stanley.
Yeah, love
great
that book. Yep.
Yeah. And Thomas Stanley talks about the fact that millionaires typically are people that might be living next door. They're not typical people living in really fancy places. And, for example, do you know what the car most commonly driven by millionaires is?
What?
You might think it's like a Lexus or something like that.
You would think?
It's Ford 150s.
Really?
Because real millionaires, or most millionaires, live frugally.
Yes.
It's not what you spend, it's what you keep.
And when it was after the financial crisis, and there was all these amazing deals out there on the market for going to auction and picking up homes, I worked with some realtors that did classes, and the people that would come in, you would look at them and think, can they pay cash for a home? And they weren't looking at getting hard money. I mean, they were literally going to the auction and paying cash. And so it's interesting when you, from the outside, you think somebody's financial situation is different. But so what are some other tips, Dennis, that you can share with my listeners on living within your means?
Okay. So I mentioned when my wife and I got out of the Air Force and we went to work at or I was working in New Jersey, we wrote everything down. Well, what we do now is we use Quicken. So when we were working before, it was before you had personal computers. So it kind of dates me. But anyway, so now we use Quicken so we can see what our expenses are. And we don't track every cent, but we do have a budget. So, we give ourselves an allowance for walking around money for what we want to spend at Starbucks and whatever. But, we can tell really at a glance, okay, how are we doing on our plans and stuff like that. So that's our budget. We track it that way.
So you've been doing this for a while and you were writing it down. Do you think somebody first starting out with this, it would be as good for them to use the technology versus, I think actually physically the effort of writing it down and disconnecting, it makes it more real for somebody that might just be starting out and then transferring and putting things in there. But just the fact of that old fashioned writing it down, really thinking before you're spending that money. What do you think, Dennis?
Yeah, I think the key thing is for at least 3 months, because that covers quarterly expenses. You write everything down. You can write it down on paper. You can put it on Excel. And, for example, I use Evernote to keep track of things when I'm walking around on my phone. It's perfect.
I talk to my phone all the time.
Hopefully it talks back too. But the key thing is you write everything down and then take a look at it and say, am I spending the money in the places I want?
Exactly. So how can you afford to live abroad full time?
Well, what we're doing is we're going to become houseless, not homeless. We actually sold our house a couple years ago. And we have friends who have traveled quite a bit, but what they do is they keep a house and then they're in an RV or whatever. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to be unencumbered. So, and this is part of that, if your outgo is more than your in-go formula. By selling the house, what we're doing is we're in a position where we can go ahead and we can live using Airbnb, in different places overseas. We're actually planning on starting out with a hike across Spain, a pilgrimage called the Way or the Camino de Santiago. And so we couldn't
That's
afford.
a pretty hardcore one.
It is. And
Yes.
we've been training for it, so it's
I'm
about
sure you
500
have.
miles. Yeah.
That's why you're looking so good, Dennis.
Well, my wife looks good too. So.
I'm sure she does.
Yeah. So, of course, my shoulders are a little bit stooped for
Yes.
the backpack.
Yeah.
But so anyway, we're going to do that, and it's really a matter of what budget you have
Yeah.
to live this lifestyle. Some people can afford to have a house and travel, but
Yeah.
we just wanted to kind of be free. We wanted to be unencumbered. So our permanent address is going to be a 7x7 storage unit for
Wow.
about 5 years.
How exciting. So what's the attraction to living, roving the world versus just taking a lot of long trips throughout the year?
Yeah. Well, I was a former Air Force officer, and I mentioned I was stationed in Germany, and we like to enjoy the culture. We like to learn some of the language, at least enough to order a beer or a glass of wine. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing I want to do is I want to do research for my next book. So
Okay.
we plan on moving to different regions of the world for 3 months, 4 months at a time, so we can just experience that culture.
That's awesome. Dennis, I understand that your passion is writing, which was one of the drivers behind early retirement. Can you tell my listeners a little bit about your book?
Yeah. So the book is called The Last Apostle, and the whole premise that John, the last apostle, is still alive, and he lives in Seattle. And it's half of it is historical fiction, takes place in the first century, and then half of it takes place in modern day Seattle and in other locations of the world. So it's doing really well, getting good reviews, and
Awesome.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And,
Yeah.
And the big question I get from people is, okay, when's the next one?
And when is the next one?
It's going to be a while because I need
Okay.
to do that research.
Now, is
and
that
make
when
sure
you were
it's
in
done
studio
right.
doing the audio, or were you doing the audio for your current book?
Right, yeah, that's because I met you at my publisher's
Yes.
house. I was doing the audio for the current book. So
Okay.
there is both a Kindle, or
Yes.
there's a Kindle, a print version, and an audio version too.
Awesome. Retiring early and getting a novel published, big goals. Any advice on generating and achieving big goals? So how, if I've got a listener out there that just has a big goal, what would be your best tip?
And this really applies to anything. Write down your goals, research them, talk to people who've been down that path before, and usually you're going to find people who are willing to share those ideas, their ideas and their experience. If you're lucky, you'll have a great partner like I do, or you surround yourself with good friends and make
Yes.
steady progress.
Makes
So,
total sense.
Yeah.
Now, if my listeners would like to get inspiration from you and watch from afar in what's happening in your life and your travels, how can they do that?
And we have a website called worldrovers.com. So it's worldrovers.com. And I'll be blogging, first of all, about where we're going, and also blogging about how you kind of achieve your own goals in that journey. And if you're interested in learning more about the book, go to thelastapostle.com. That has information on the book and also about my appearances in the local area.
Wonderful. Dennis, thank you so much. It was great having you in studio, and excited to read your next book when that comes out, and definitely hearing about all your travels.
Great. Thanks for having
I'll
me.
be watching you.
Okay, great.
And coming up next in the Money Hour, are you buying or selling real estate? If you are, how are you handling this crazy market? Kim Frazier with John L. Scott in Bellevue, right here on 1150 AM KKNW.